Chapter 30 Self-proclaimed hero Natsuki Subaru. My Zelda's expression was resolute as she declared that she would give up her position as chief. The dominance of her wild, strong-eyed beauty had not diminished, and she was still exactly the same as when he had first seen her. This impression is the same as the first time he saw her, when she lost her right leg and decided to step down from her position as chief. It is the people around My Zelda who have a deep sense of regret. The people of Shadra, who have seen the strength of My Zelda, the chief, up close and personal, will never be able to wipe away their frustration and sense of loss easily. Kanna's expressionlessness was compounded by her usual sullenness, and even Holly, who always kept a relaxed pace, had a downcast look on her face. A teary-eyed Utakata bit her lip and turned her head down, and the other Shadras all had somber expressions on their faces, but the one who was the most greatly distraught of all Talitha. Oh, Anu, it's impossible. There's no way I can be a chief. My Zelda, Talitha, it's because you're Anu. I don't have the capacity to do that. Shaking her head in shock, Talitha appealed desperately. She was the sister who was nominated by My Zelda to be the next chief, and it was easy to imagine from her daily words and actions that she respected and almost worshipped her sister. For this reason, Talitha was extremely upset, unable to accept the fact that My Zelda had lost her leg. She was even more upset than My Zelda was. Rem, I was not strong enough. Talitha's grief-stricken plea was met by a weak, self-condemning voice. It was coming from the only one that can use healing magic in this place, and it was very useful. You could tell from Rem's bloodied clothes, disheveled hair, and exhausted expression how hard she had worked. She refused to admit to it, and even when Subaru first thanked her for her efforts, she insisted that she was fine. Nevertheless, no one has the right to blame Rem for her lack of strength. Without her, we would not have been able to get a result where no one died from the attack by Arakia. We all understood that. Therefore, My Zelda, Rem, there is no need for you to be concerned. I was lucky to get out of the battle with the general only losing my leg. It was only with your help ... that I'm here right now. Rem, My Zelda-san. My Zelda, I'm grateful to you. I have nothing more to say. My Zelda thanked her again, and Rem could not say anything more. Louis, with his long blonde hair in disarray, was standing beside the silent Rem, placing her hand on Louis' shoulder, who was gently picking at her. Rem quietly lowered her eyes. Subaru felt the remorse and helplessness that Rem felt, and it was painfully obvious to him. But it was faster for the dark-haired handsome man to step forward than for Subaru to say anything. Abel, My Zelda, you're not going to change your mind, are you? Abel's question as he stepped forward was met with a nod from My Zelda, who sat at the object. She ran her fingers over the cut surface of her bandaged leg. My Zelda, oh, I'm not going to change it. The pact between Shadra and Emperor Volika will be kept. You'll have to ask Talitha, the chief, not me, about what happens next. Abel, okay, all right. My Zelda, you've done a great service. My Zelda, Abel, who had his arms crossed, understood her answer. With that, My Zelda let out a small exhale and fell out of favor. With a faint smile, she looked Abel up and down. My Zelda, for what it's worth, let me see your smile. It's the duty of a good-looking woman. Abel, My Zelda, that's good. Even though she had just lost her leg, My Zelda was still too strong. Even the arrogant Abel did not blame her for her disrespect, but laughed at her attitude. This was the best proof that the Emperor, who had been deprived of his throne, showed respect to the female warrior living in the forest. And then My Zelda, listen, my brethren. My Zelda's smiling face tightened, and she raised her head to speak. Hearing the fierce sound of her voice, the Shadras all straightened their posture and went into a listening posture. My Zelda, as I told you earlier, I am fulfilling my duty as chief. I now hand over the role of chief to my sister, Talitha. Everyone will follow Talitha from now on. Shadras, My Zelda, this is my last command as a chief. Thank you for your patriarchal vows and your ancestral pride. Shadras, thank you. My Zelda concluded, and the Shadras recited. He had no knowledge of their customs or long-standing practices, but even Subaru, an outsider, could sense that it was a ritual of succession. It was short, not formal, and a combination of practical and conceptual inheritance. Here was the succession of the chief of the Shadra people from My Zelda to Talitha. Talitha, anew. My Zelda, you look downcast. Chief, your hesitation is our hesitation. Your death is our death. Talitha, My Zelda walked over and encouraged Talitha, the new chief, whose expression was not clear. It doesn't make Talitha feel any better at once. However, Talitha must have realized that clinging to her will not change the situation. After a few moments of silence, Talitha nodded curtly, though silently. My Zelda, the mixed emotions that passed through My Zelda's eyes as she saw this was something Talitha could not see as she bowed her head, and it was a sanctuary that no one but her was allowed to mention. Subaru, I have to admit, I was surprised. Subaru called out to Abel as he did so, just as the chieftain's change of plans and damage report ended. Abel frowned at being stopped and given subject-less feedback, and then asked with displeasure, what? Briefly, inquiring about Subaru's true intentions. Abel, I have a lot to think about. Don't bother me with you. Subaru, I'm not sure what to say. I was just surprised that you so readily admitted that My Zelda-san was out of the war. Abel, Subaru, I thought you would say, what's the point of losing one leg? I thought you were going to tell her to work herself to death for you. Even though he thought it was too extreme, Subaru told Abel how he honestly felt. The Emperor was considering adding the Shadra people to his forces to reclaim the throne, or worse, poisoning the citadel city of Garrel. Abel, no, Vincent Volika, was willing to take such an attitude. Abel, nonsense, what's the point of forcing me like this? However, Abel's answer to Subaru's question was calm and sober. In front of the snickering Subaru, Abel looked at Shadras, who were in the middle of a discussion in the distance. Abel, I don't want my men to do more than they can do. Even if I order them to do their best, it would be delusional to expect them to spit out more than they can handle. Subaru. Abel, if you want to do more than you've been told to do, you'll just mess up your calculations. I want nothing more or less from my men, and my Zelda has done her part. Then all I can give her is a reward. With words, he blasted them. With rewards, he got them to exceed their abilities, and with praise, he made them promise to do better. Subaru had always thought that this was how powerful people subjugated their subordinates, so Abel's answer was in direct contradiction to what Subaru had in mind. He didn't ask his subordinates to do more than they can do. This seemed to be a good environment for subordinates to work in, but also a lonely one. Abel, of course, work that is not worthy of evaluation will be rewarded with punishment. You know what that means, don't you, Subaru? Does that mean I'm going to be punished? Abel, if you were my subordinate, then yes, but are you? Staring straight ahead, Subaru's eyes widened at Abel's words. Of course, Subaru did not remember being Abel's subordinate in his mind. In his discussion with Priscilla, Abel had treated Subaru as a military commander, but he had no intention of worshipping him. Subaru, it's not that I'm not attracted to the title of military commander, but I don't want to be your subordinate. Abel, I'm sure you are. You're not my subordinate. You are not my subordinate, and therefore, you do not fall under the category of merit or punishment. Subaru, when you think about it, what are you to me? Result. It's not like they're allies or comrades in arms. They are not allies, nor friends, or comrades in arms at all. If I had to say, he'd say they're cross-dressing buddies. Abel, some of you took the liberty of calling me a friend, but you are not. Subaru, I'm a shy guy, so I don't make friends easily. Given the current situation, the person who would call me a friend here would either be a very good person or a fraud, and Flop is just the former. And Abel, I'm going to continue my conversation with Priscilla. You're in your element. Also, shouldn't you worry about the other girl? Subaru, you don't need to tell me that. Slit eyes slit open, and Subaru's gaze leaves Abel and heads for the corner of the room. There, he saw Rem sitting on the floor. He couldn't make out the downcast expression from a distance, but there was no doubt that he couldn't leave her alone. He was somewhat annoyed that Abel had told me first. Subaru, I don't want you to get in trouble with Priscilla and start another fight. Just be careful how you talk to her. Abel, I'm sure many would advise that you, not I, should be the one to speak those words. Hateful words returned with more hateful words, and Subaru parted ways with Abel, who returned to the conference hall. My Zelda's leg will change the nature of the Shadra people, and it will be necessary to take that into account when talking with Priscilla. However, there was little room for Subaru in the conversation between Abel and Priscilla. The priority was to speak as only Subaru could. Subaru, Rem, is this a good time? He took a light deep breath, calmed himself down, and headed under Rem. Rem, who was sitting with her knees folded and her back against the wall, jerked slightly at Subaru's words and reflected our figure in his vaguely pale blue eyes. Rem, is that you? When are you going to change your clothes? Subaru, Rem is more important than getting dressed. I'll be changing as soon as this conversation is over. Rem, I see. Then we're done talking. Please go change your clothes. Subaru, that's so sketchy. Subaru shouted at Rem's unconvincing response. At Subaru's voice, Rem's eyes sharpened and she said, please be quiet. Then she shuffled her chin toward the girl leaning on her left shoulder and said, Rem, you'll wake up Louis-chan, who is asleep. Please take care of her. Subaru, that's Rem, or do you not want to put that much care into this girl? Subaru, I don't want to sound like a jerk. I'm sorry. Louis was snuggled up to Rem, breathing a small sleep. Louis, who had blood stained all over her white clothes, had been helping Rem to treat the wounded, and from what he had heard from Rem's attitude and from Yutakata, she was doing exactly as she was told, albeit poorly. Naturally, Subaru's inner thoughts were mixed, though. Rem, if you look so grim in that way, you'll be out of shape. Subaru, oh, yeah, my bad. My makeup is messed up, and it's not looking good. Rem, it's not unsightly. It's been that way since you had proper makeup on. Subaru, Tohoho. Subaru's shoulders slumped in depression at Ram's remark, which was as harsh as ever. Subaru then slowly sat down on Rem's right side, opposite Louis, and they sat side by side. He glanced at Rem's protesting gaze, but consciously ignored it. Subaru, Rem, you did a great job. You've saved us all a lot of trouble. Rem, I also realized my lack of power. To tell you the truth, I'm unworthy. Subaru, Rem. In response to the words of commiseration, Rem looked down at her hands regretfully, looking at those white fingers. Rem bit her lip weakly. Rem, I'm not ungrateful. Even my memory is fuzzy, but I've learned to use healing magic and you've helped me a lot. And yet, Rem, I know, if that were true, this magic wouldn't have been like this. Subaru, what do you mean it wasn't like this? Rem, healing magic, that's what. The magic I'm using now is sensory. In other words, self-taught. Though with Louis-chan's assistance I've managed to get it into shape. Rems, the words beyond that did not continue. The reason why it didn't continue was because she knew that she didn't need to say it, and she knew that if she said it, it would be the blade that hurted Rem, and that the pain will comfort her, even if only slightly. Weakness, when spoken, hurts oneself and others. Instead, it is something that lightens your heart just a little bit, and Rem was not willing to let himself be lightened, and Rem was unwilling to let herself be lightened, a sign that she truly blames herself for her inability to save others. Subaru. Once again, Subaru painfully understood Rem's feelings. Regret that you could have done more is more painful to me than an unreachable wall. It's even worse when it's about someone else's future, someone other than your own. The loss of my Zelda's leg has left a heavy impression on Subaru's heart. It wasn't a life, but it was not hard to imagine the magnitude of losing one of the forelimbs. The most recent example was Al, a man with a ship's arm who lost his left arm. In the sluice city of Pristilla, Rickard lost one of his arms when he confronted Gluttony during a battle. It was a shocking event, but it was not a tragedy so remote that it couldn't happen. In fact, if you were in a position to fight, it might be more appropriate to call it a familiar tragedy. Still Subaru, that's harsh. Rem, yes, I'm not sure what to make of this. This is the first time he's ever heard a straightforward nod without repercussions, but he's afraid he's not in the right frame of mind to appreciate it. Rem glanced at Subaru, who was holding a lump deep in his chest. Rem, I wonder what if I was the one from before. Subaru, what would Rem have been like when you had memories? Rem, yes, with my healing magic then. My Zelda-san's leg would have been. Subaru closed his eyes at the words that could have been continued. Were you able to leave it behind? He didn't know what Rem was thinking. However, it was difficult for Subaru, as an outsider, to judge the extent to which the presence or absence of memory had affected Rem's healing magic. Even if it were possible to quantify the healing power, it would be difficult for Subaru to evaluate it. However, Rem, her pale blue eyes filled with earnest emotion, was looking at Subaru. He didn't know if the answer she's looking for was something that Subaru can provide, but there are only two choices in front of him. You could or you couldn't. Which of the two will be the salvation for Rem? Which of the two will help Rem? Subaru, I don't think there was anything you could have done with your memories. Rem, Subaru, even healing magic isn't a panacea. In that case, Rem would have done the best she could, he replied after a few seconds of agonizing thought, but which felt much longer in Subaru's mind. Even if Rem had memories, even if her healing magic had been in perfect condition, she would not have been able to save my Zelda's leg. It's not about the facts. If we start talking about what ifs, there is no end to it. It is true that Rem could not save my Zelda's leg, but she did save the lives of many other injured people. She should be praised for her achievement, and there was no reason for her to blame herself. In fact, if there was any blame to be placed, it would be Subaru. I wasn't strong enough, Rem. Subaru, I didn't think enough. I should have examined things more seriously. Hearing Subaru's answer, Rem's round eyes widened. In front of Rem, Subaru bit down hard on his back teeth and covered his face with his hands. If he was going to curse his lack of strength, the blame should have fallen on Subaru. Subaru, it's all my fault. Despite the pompous claims of a bloodless castle, the reality was far from it. Arakia's intrusion caused many injuries, and the city guards were also killed when she was recaptured. There were no casualties, but looking at my Zelda's missing leg, how could she be called bloodless? We failed. He failed, and he failed, and he failed again and again, and he failed again and again. All he wanted was the best possible happy ending, and what he got was either a so-so happy ending or what I would call a so-so bad ending. To paraphrase Abel's words earlier, he should be punished. If Subaru had been one of Abel's men, he would have had his head chopped off. Worst of all, he would have to return by death. The thought crossed his mind. In that case, the most likely place he would return to was during the bloody battle he had with Todd in Geralt. When he thought back to it, his whole body was filled with fear. Still, even if he returned to that moment of terror, if he can pick up what he've left out of it, Rem, why? Suddenly, such words struck Subaru's eardrums as she pondered. When he looked up quickly, he was met head-on by Rem's eyes, which were staring right at him. Rem's eyes, which had been moist with remorse until just before, were now staring straight at Subaru with a strong remorse in them. Why? How can this be your fault? The words were piled on top of the words to Subaru, who was flustered by Rem's gaze and unable to move. She extended her hand with moist A's, indicating the devastated city hall. Rem, so my Zelda-san's leg, Louis Chan's and Utakata-chan's injuries, Medium San's and Flop San's wounds, everything is your fault? Subaru, it is. Yes, it wouldn't have happened if I'd been more careful and prepared. Rem, you thought of a plan, and your seemingly reckless plan paid off properly. You were able to hold the generals in place and get them into the city without letting anyone fight, just like we planned. Subaru, but then there was Rem, who cares about what happened after. Rem raised an eyebrow and her voice at Subaru's insistence. Louis, who was leaning against her, fell into her lap. She jerked slightly and groaned softly, not waking up. While supporting Louis' shoulder, Rem puffed slightly and looked at Subaru again. Rem, no one could have foreseen what would happen after that. The appearance of that half-naked woman and her rampage were all unpredictable. And yet, Subaru, Rem, so why are you responsible for all of that? He was not sure what to say. If you asked him why, I think it's the responsibility of the one that has the power. In the same way that Rem lamented the lack of power in her own healing magic, Subaru sometimes regrets and laments the fact that his own authority could not make up for it. The scope of return by death is greater. The future can be better or worse if Subaru exercises his power. However, Subaru, it's a truth that can't be told, even if the person is Rem. It's not just about Rem, Subaru's authority. This is the one thing you can't tell someone, no matter how open you are with them. No, you can't tell it to someone you have a heart-to-heart relationship with. There is no way he could reveal the truth that might cause the death of that person if he told them. He's afraid of pain. The pain that comes from trying to tell someone that you are dying again is terrifying. How many times can one get used to the intense pain that grips one's heart? But what is truly frightening is not the pain, but the loss. Is there anything in this world that is more terrifying than loss? Isn't it precisely because of this extreme fear that this power was given to Natsuki Subaru? Rem, why did you protect me? Subaru, what? Rem continued to speak as if he had given up on Subaru, who was silent and unable to answer. For a moment, Subaru blinked, unsure of what she was talking about. Rem, it was when that half-naked woman attacked me. I knocked down a pillar, and when that didn't get through, and that woman came at me. You stood in front of me. Subaru stood in front of her, selflessly trying to save Rem from being attacked by Arakia. With his hands outstretched, he was desperate to keep any threat away from Rem. At that moment, Subaru didn't care if Arakia took his life. He wanted Rem to outlive him for even a second longer. That is, Rem, the result of your bloodless dedication, the fact that you covered for me at that moment, and even the fact that my Zelda-san lost her leg. You tried to hold it all in on your own. Subaru, Rem, you're not strong enough to do all of those things. At first, I was wary of you because of that horrible smell. That was where Rem broke off his words, and once she did, she looked down at Louis on his lap, gently stroking her golden hair. Rem choked and gently turned her gaze back to Subaru, saying, Rem, I, Louis-chan, Abel-san, Zelda-san and the others, Medium-san and Flop-san are all human beings with a will, and you don't have to breathe through them to protect them. Subaru, oh, Subaru, please don't try to do anything like that all by yourself. You don't have to take responsibility for our actions. Subaru's mouth opened and closed in a crunch, overwhelmed by the repeated words. His brain refused to comprehend promptly what was being said. However, an unidentified sense of urgency burned in his mind, forcing him to listen no further. Rem, cursing his lack of power, bites back with earnest emotion. He said, don't say anything else, Rem. You're not a special person. He knew he shouldn't let her say it. Rem, because you're not a hero. Wandering. Subaru walked through the city hall as if wandering. He had no destination in mind. In the first place, it was not even clear when he started walking. When he came to, he was walking, and if anything, his consciousness was still in a state of vagueness. Subaru. What? Suddenly, he was hit head-on by a hard impact. If you look at it, it seemed that he hit a wall because he was walking while only staring at his feet, slamming his forehead against the empty wall. Subaru held his aching forehead and exhaled. Then, without thinking, he slammed his forehead against the hard wall again. There was a hard impact and a dull sound, and Subaru felt a stinging pain in his brain. As he shook his brain from the outside, he felt as if the stagnation that permeated his whole body was slowly receding. In the same manner, Subaru slammed his forehead against the wall again and again. Slam, slam, slam. Hey, don't do that, bro. As he pulled back to strike, his shoulder was grabbed from behind and he was called out. If you look, you will see Subaru's vision as he turned around and collided with a gaze through the steel helmet that was watching him. The other party grabbed Subaru by the shoulders, snapping the bones in his own neck and said, Al, I know how you feel about dying. There's no end to it. No matter how many times you do it, you know.